Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski bringing you a new Game Master Toolbox video. And one of the questions that I get periodically is how do I use music for our tabletop role-playing sessions? And music is a great tool to convey emotion or set the mood, and I've used music on and off for several years now in our games. So I'm going to share some suggestions and ideas on how I use it and some of the pitfalls that I've found. Now, with most things RPG, there is of course a lot of case by case and a ton of exceptions, so always use your best judgment as far as when to stick to these suggestions and when not to, and as I'm going to be covering later on, I don't even stick to them all the time. Now, I'm not going to tell you what specific music you should play during your games. Music tastes are very personal, and I'm not going to tell you what music you should like. But one thing that I do suggest is to mind the volume. Remember that the music is to enhance the game and add some mood, but no one at the table should have to strain to hear what anyone else at the table is saying, because it's at that point it becomes distracting and begins taking away from the game. For our games, I use this little Bluetooth speaker here. It's got a good sound and I like it quite a bit. And it sits on this table behind me, one, so I can turn it on or off whenever I decide that I do or don't want the music, but also if it's behind me, I become the first person that the music affects, the first person that the sound hits. That way I know if the music is going to be too loud or not. Otherwise, if I place the speaker on the far side of the room, I might not think it's that loud because by the time the sound gets to me, I think it's a perfect sound. But the person that's sitting next to it might think that the volume is a little bit too high and they might find it a little bit difficult to hear what I or anyone else at the table is saying. It's sort of like when you're in a car and you're riding in the back seat and the music is playing and you can't hear anyone in the front because the speakers are in the back, so you just suffer, unable to enjoy any of the conversations. And you don't even have a dog or anything to keep you company. You're just back there, alone, like you don't even exist. Next, one thing to always remember is that you're not a DJ. And even if you are a DJ, you're not here to DJ, you're here to be a game master. Whenever we're imagining our games, we like to envision, the perfect music playing at the perfect moment. So, during the game, we'll pick up our phone or our iPod or whatever else it is that we're using to play our music, and then we scroll to find that perfect song to play at that exact moment. However, that can quickly become taking your attention away from the game itself. If scrolling through your music becomes distracting to you as the game master, then it's hurting the game because it's distracting your attention away from it. And while we like to imagine, or sometimes we even remember it later on, a certain scene like a combat or whatnot playing along perfectly with the flow of some sort of music that was playing in the background, sort of like you have in a movie. The simple truth is that even simple scenes in a game can take a lot longer to play out when it's actually done. You've got dice rolls going on, you've got players, asking questions and trying to make sure that they understand everything right. And even a simple scene can take a lot longer to play out than that 3 or 4 minute song that you have planned. And in that case, you only play a 3 or 4 minute song, but the scene itself might last 15 minutes. And now you're picking up your music player, trying to choose a new track. And once again, it's getting distracting. So instead of worrying about what individual song happens to be playing at any particular moment, what I do is I just make a playlist to convey the mood. So if we're playing Dungeons and Dragons or some fantasy game, for example, I have several general playlists such as Town, Dungeon, Wilderness, Combat. I choose the appropriate playlist for the situation, put it on random, and then focus my attention back to the game itself. Of course, different games that we might be playing have different playlists for it, such as Cyberpunk or Call of Cthulhu. For each of those games, I've got 2 to 3 playlists that I'll do for those. Now, you can either build this list manually, choosing all the tracks one at a time and putting them on there so it's perfect, or you can use one of those programs or something like Pandora out there to build a playlist for you. It doesn't matter. But the big thing to remember is that the individual or particular song that's playing at any particular moment is not as important as the mood that you're trying to go for with them. Another thing regarding the songs that I use is that I find that lyrics can be distracting, so I focus instead on instrumental tracks, usually movie or video game soundtracks. Chanting, however, is totally fine, as well as some sort of unintelligible lyrics. But the song has understandable lyrics, it can kind of pull your players out of the game and into the song itself. And the last thing you might want is for your players to all be singing along with Taylor Swift when you're really wanting them to be battling the dreaded orc army, though now that I do think about it, it sounds kind of funny, but I'm pretty sure if I was in that situation, I might see that differently. In addition to recognizable lyrics, I also try to avoid songs that are too recognizable. Remember, music is emotional, it can evoke memories, and I want my players to be making new memories and not thinking of old ones, particularly of some movie that they watched at some point. For that reason, most of the tracks that I choose aren't from overly recognizable sources. For example, in my Pulp Cthulhu tracks, while Indiana Jones has certainly been a great source for game inspiration, I don't use any of the music from the Indiana Jones movies because they're so recognizable as being Indiana Jones. So instead, I use the score from King Solomon's Mines, which is similar. It hits the same pulpy tones of adventure, but isn't too recognizable as to make them think of that movie. In fact, that's a really bad movie and they probably don't want to think about it. Now, once again, there's always exceptions to everything, so when I ran Conan, you bet your butt that my Conan playlist included both the Conan the Barbarian and Conan the Destroyer soundtracks. And if I was playing Star Wars and my Jedi was facing down some big bad Sith Lord in a lightsaber battle, I would absolutely play Duel of the Fates, and I think that's actually required by law that you play that song for a good lightsaber battle. But the more recognizable songs from the Lord of the Rings soundtrack are not on my D&D or fantasy soundtracks because I don't want my players to be thinking about the Lord of the Rings movies while we're trying to play the game. I want them to be thinking about their own adventures, and I want them to be tying the music to what's going on with their own adventures rather than what happened to Frodo or Gandalf or some such. So use your best judgment as far as what songs you believe are going to enhance or maybe detract from the mood based off how well the players and yourself might recognize the sources they're from. Now, since I said there are a lot of exceptions to just about everything I'm going to tell you, and I did say that trying to play a specific song to accompany a specific scene really isn't that feasible, let's talk about a big exception to that, and that's using music as a dramatic timer. You can have a scene, such as the players have to solve a riddle or a puzzle or find a secret door before the room they're in fills with water. And by employing a particular song, especially one that's building up to some sort of big ending, that can work really well as a timer. A wonderful example of a scenario that did this very well was Pax Cthuliana, which uses specific songs and key points as a dramatic timer, and it worked beautifully when we ran it. Now, I really wouldn't want to try that gag all the time, but I think it can make for a really cool trick to do every once in a while, kind of enhance a game every so often. Also, and while this isn't music that you're supposed to be playing during a session, another great way to use music is a pre-game pump-up song. I've done this one for years. Many years ago, we were running a very Ravenloft-esque campaign, very dark themes and vampires that were secretly ruling the world, and I started out every session by playing Smashing Pumpkins' Bullet with Butterfly Wings. I played that song for the group, and we'd use it to sort of get into the mindset and get into the mood for the game. But ever since then, while I don't do a group pump-up song like that anymore, I still have one for myself, something that I listen to just before the session begins. For Call of Cthulhu, it's Call of Cthulhu by Metallica. For one of our cyberpunk campaigns, it was Bodies by Drowning Pool. For Traveler, which we've started playing recently, I started out with Space Truckin' by Deep Purple, but have since adopted High Passage, Low Passage by Slaufeg. Again, this is something that I do just for me. In fact, most of my players don't even realize this is something that I do. Watching this video is probably how they're even going to learn this is something that I do before my games. But a pump-up song really does help get you in the frame of mind for your game. So I do really recommend this as a way for game masters or entire groups, if you want to do this as a group thing, to kind of ceremonially leave the whole world behind of what's going on in the world outside the door and just get themselves in the mood for the game. So that's music. However, let's turn our attention to something that's technically not music, but I find equally as useful, and that's ambient sounds. For those that don't want to use actual music during their games, but still want to emulate mood and atmosphere, there's a lot of ambient soundtracks out there that you can use. Many of them are freely available on YouTube. There's also Tabletop Audio, which has a great library to select from. And with those, you can have, sounds of a village as your characters enter some sort of medieval village. It's got the clomp of hoof steps and, the kind of the twitter of birds, murmured voices in the background, or the tinging of a blacksmith's anvil, and it kind of creates the mood of what it's like to be inside this town. Then, when you switch this to a dungeon setting, it changes to the faint dripping of water, wind whistling through a crag somewhere, the occasional rock tumbling off in the distance, sort of an echoey sound. For example, when I ran the Call Call of Cthulhu scenario, The Derelict, I played a 10-hour ASMR track of an icebreaker ship, which is a lot of wind and crumbling ice, and that worked very, very well when used for that scenario. Now, one really cool ambient tool out there, which is also totally free if you want to get the basic package, is Syrinscape, which is a badass soundboard program that offers all kinds of customizable tracks for both sci-fi and fantasy games. I only recently started using this when Jay Gray from Our Telsorian, tipped me off that they had made a Syrinscape for their new Cyberpunk game coming out, and I was absolutely blown away once I started using this program. So Syrinscape, highly recommend it. They are not paying me for anything to say that. It's just I'm a very satisfied user and I really enjoy spreading the word about it. The only problem with that program is that there are so many customizable options and little effects you can drag, drop in, whenever you have the clang of swords or the firing of a gun or maybe somebody's scream off in the distance, that it can become distracting if a game master begins playing with it too much during their sessions. So yes, it is an extremely awesome tool, but do try to suppress the urge to make it distracting because you're beginning to play with it too much. But anyway, links below. Now, there are some other ambient soundtrack programs out there, but I haven't used those, so I can't recommend them. But if you ever consider using an ambient track instead of music, it's definitely worth looking into one of them. Overall, music, whether it's actual songs or ambient sounds, can be an extremely potent tool in order to put both you and your players into a different place, whether that's giving them a sense of excitement or mystery or even fear. But always be sure that you're using your music or ambient songs in a way that enhances the experience for people. Even if it's just one person at the table that's getting a better experience by using it, then it is worth it, as long as it's not diminishing the experience for anyone else. And since we are discussing audio, I might as well give a shameless plug here. I am a fantasy author with several audiobooks available, 2 of which were Audio Award finalists for Best Paranormal Audiobook. So if you want to support my channel or just want to listen to some Monster Hunter stories read by R.C. Bray, please check those out. Links below. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.